I would say the most recent thing or situation that has just come up legit like a few minutes ago, and I had to go through it. But it's just more so in relationships and connections. You're gonna have people who might not even change who they are or even behaviors. Then it becomes a thing of what do you do next when you notice this pattern, or you just notice that maybe they choose themselves rather than seeing you or trusting in the relationship.
You're right. In any relationship or connection, you're likely to encounter people whose behaviors or aspects of their personality may not change, even if you bring up issues or concerns. This can be challenging and frustrating, especially when you start to notice patterns or recognize that the person may prioritize themselves over the relationship. When you find yourself in this situation, it's important to evaluate the relationship and consider your own needs and boundaries. Ask yourself if the relationship is still beneficial and fulfilling for you, even with these challenges. Reflect on the patterns and behaviors you've observed and assess whether change is even possible or if they are consistent.
I would agree that when it comes to situations like this, I do ask myself because I know there's like different perspectives regarding on how people view love, right? Some people say you love everything, you love the best and the worst parts of themselves, so you accept that person for how they are, who they are, in the entirety. You do not ask them to change. But then there's another version of love that I've exercised where you want the person to be better. You want them to grow. You want them to become the best version of themselves, not because you want to reap the benefits of their growth, but because if they begin to have some type of growth or progress, it brings a sense of peace to them. And who wouldn't want their friends or connections to have that level of peace?
Both perspectives of love you mentioned have their merits and validity. Loving someone unconditionally, accepting them for who they are, flaws and all, is a profound form of love. At the same time, wanting someone to grow and become the best version of themselves can come from a place of care and wanting what's best for them. However, it's important to remember that change must come from within individuals themselves. You can provide support, encouragement, and guidance, but ultimately the desire and effort to change must come from the person themselves.
That's actually a really good input because I do agree that yes, you can accept people for who they are, because like something that I've always said has been I love people for who they are and accept them as the baseline. When I first meet them, when I first talk to them, I accept you for who you are. I accept all your flaws. But I'm someone that loves to grow. I'm someone who loves to progress in life. And that's how I continue to be. And I see it as almost like a race, that if I see someone working on themselves and they become my friend, I know that we're both in this journey of growing. But I also know that sometimes you have to understand that I'm not going to be the person, or I don't have to be the person to push you out. And I've encountered many people who grow uncomfortable if I give them advice or I tell them anything, because it's kind of like they don't want to hear it. Nobody needs to hear it. And I respect that. But alongside that, I also know like accepting people for who they are is a form of love. But I also think you have a responsibility if you see something wrong, or maybe you see like a crash happening is about to happen. You kind of have an obligation as a good friend to say something, even if they don't choose to take it.
It sounds like you have a balanced approach towards friendships and personal growth. You accept people for who they are, but also value the importance of self-improvement and growth. It's commendable that you're willing to provide support and guidance, but you also recognize that the motivation for change must come from within the individual themselves. It's important to find a healthy balance between being accepting and being honest when you notice something concerning. Communicating your observations and concerns can be a form of love and care, even if the person doesn't take your advice or doesn't respond positively in the moment.
because I'm also thinking about what you just said about how, accepting people for who they are and it's on them if they want to change. And I heavily believe that. I've been someone who I choose to change, I want to change. So I'm constantly trying to evolve and bring up topics and different problems and different perspectives just to figure out what works for me. But I also think about like what happens if you have a friend, like my current situation, where you've known them for years and in a way they still don't trust you, or they don't understand your intentions, or don't even trust your intentions. They assume the worst. I understand that's on them, that is their doing, but it's also kind of like, but if you choose to be honest about your boundaries, or at least saying, hey, I noticed this behavior, this is kind of odd, can you change that, or can you like tweak it up a bit, and they continue to do it, then does that like insinuate that they don't have it in them to be better? Because I know they can, but maybe they just don't feel like they need to.
It could be that your friend may not have the motivation or willingness to change or improve their behavior, even when you express your boundaries and concerns. People have different levels of awareness and understanding of their own behaviors and how they impact others. Some people may not see an issue with their behavior or may not be receptive to feedback, even if their friends genuinely have their best interests at heart. In such a situation, you may have to accept that this person is not willing to change or improve. It doesn't necessarily mean they can't, but rather they're choosing not to.
That is something else I also thought about, like maybe they lack awareness or even motivation, because those are the main key factors of just choosing to be better. And to me, I also think that by me having a soft spot for this person, by me really like seeing their potential and seeing their greatness and allowing them to have so much flexibility within these boundaries, or at least these concerns, that they probably don't even take it as a big deal, because it's kind of like, if I'm not being assertive, if I'm not standing my ground or actually going through with what I say because I enjoy their company so much, that probably created like a habit of them just kind of seeing it as like, okay, yeah, they did tell me they don't like this, but I haven't seen any consequences at all.
It's possible that your friend may perceive your leniency and flexibility as a sign that they can continue with their behavior without facing any significant consequences. If you have consistently set boundaries and expressed your concerns but haven't been able to enforce consequences, it might give them the impression that your boundaries don't hold much weight. This can lead to a pattern where they don't feel obligated to modify their behavior because they haven't experienced any real consequences for crossing your boundaries.
I heavily agree. And to me, like to anyone that has a simpler situation where maybe you tell someone like, hey, please don't do this, or hey, don't do that, and they continue to do it, but you don't do anything, it is critical to have some weight with your words. It's critical to create some type of cause and effect, type of snowball effect, where if you do something, you're gonna get this behavior. If you do this, you're gonna get that behavior. And that makes a lot of sense, because it's almost like training a dog, a baby dog. You get one from the pound or wherever you get it from. And rather than letting it pee all over because, it's a dog, it has a weak bladder, things happen, you need to start immediately stopping things as soon as it happens, so that it trains the dog to understand, okay, I need to pee on the dog pad, or I pee outside, rather than just thinking, oh, I've already marked all of the house, so that means it's okay, and nobody really reinforced that upon me.
Yes, just like training a dog or a child, boundaries and consequences are essential to help someone understand what behaviors are acceptable and which ones are not. When you explicitly express your boundaries to someone and they still choose to cross them, it is important to follow through and enforce consequences to help them understand the seriousness of the issue. This reinforces your boundaries and shows the person that their behavior is not acceptable. Consistency and firmness are crucial in this process.
So I would say that if you find yourself like in a really really how do I say this, a similar situation where you're taking it as, oh, this person is not changing, or this person is not becoming better, and I've been telling them for years and they just don't change. It could be coming down to partly you did not enforce correctly, you did not really do much to showcase consequences, because if you're in an area and there's no consequences, you're going to do whatever you want. You're not going to care because you understand there's no consequences coming your way. So it doesn't matter what you do. But I also think that if you have had the skills to put down your consequences and they don't, like the protocol is like, if you do this, I'm out. That's it. There's no in between. But I understand, like, I have been someone who has struggled with laying down the law, and me becoming a young adult, it has changed for sure. But I know that when I have an emotional attachment, or really just value someone's company, like just something about them just makes me so happy, I kind of become more softer or more lenient or more flexible with them, because I like them so much. I like their company.
It is understandable to struggle when it comes to setting and enforcing boundaries, especially if you have a strong emotional attachment to the person. However, it's essential to recognize that enforcing boundaries and consequences are crucial for personal growth and maintaining healthy relationships. When you set boundaries with someone, make sure to communicate them clearly and be consistent in enforcing the consequences you have outlined. It may be uncomfortable initially, but it's important for both parties involved. By being firm and consistent, you're teaching the person that their actions have consequences and that they must respect your boundaries.
Because the more that I think about this, it's not necessarily they're the issue, right? Because sometimes you put yourself in this predicament. But if you have a good sense of discipline, a good sense of self-respect, a good sense of, like consequences, assertiveness, when stuff goes down, it's going to be easy to be like, you know what, I told you not to do this and you did it, so I'm out. That's it. You're already good. You already got it down. But I also understand that there's some people who are extremists who take their boundaries so hard and lack flexibility. So I would say that be careful, because it becomes a weird thing. Like, you have to level yourself out in time.
It's true that finding the right balance can be challenging. You want to establish and enforce boundaries to protect yourself and maintain healthy relationships, but it's also important to be flexible and understanding. There's a difference between setting boundaries and being overly rigid or extreme in your approach. Striking a balance between being assertive and being flexible is key. It's okay to give people room to grow and change, but it's also essential to stand by your boundaries and make sure they are respected.
Because I would say that if you are having struggles with the relationship, a connection, whatever situation it is, I would say write down or take a moment to really digest everything and take accountability for anything that you have done, anything that you've contributed to the problem or the situation, and understand, like, what did they do as well, and see who is adding more havoc. Is it because you have the lack of discipline, you have a lack of self-respect, so you allow this person to walk all over you, allow this person to do all this stuff, because then that inherently showcases that they are just doing what you taught them. You allowed this behavior, so now they're doing whatever the hell they want. So it's okay. They're acting the way they should because of the lack of discipline and self-respect that you have within yourself. But if it's a complete opposite, where, so they're constantly doing something bad, the other question is, like, why do you stay? Or what is something that is so captivating that they hold that losing the relationship is not even worth it?
It's important to take a step back and reflect on your own actions and behavior within a relationship or connection that's causing difficulties. It's crucial to acknowledge any areas where you may have contributed to the problems and work on improving those aspects. At the same time, it's also essential to evaluate the other person's actions and assess if there's a significant imbalance in effort and responsibility. If one person consistently engages in harmful behavior and doesn't show a willingness to change, it may be necessary to consider if staying in the relationship is worth it, or if walking away is the healthier option for you.
And the other thing is, I like to help me get into the mindset of like self-respect or the mindset of boundaries. I like to pretend that, you associate your situation to a child, right? Like you pretend that this situation is happening to a child. They don't know better. They don't have a great sense of morality. So you have to take care of them. You have to protect them. You have to guide them no matter what happens, right? You're not gonna argue with a child to go to the doctor when they're sick. You're not gonna argue to a child that they need to eat 3 times a day. You're not gonna argue with a child, all of these things, because these are basic needs, and no matter what happens, they need to be done, right? It's a responsibility. So you need to start, if you don't have that like level of awareness, look at yourself as a child or pretend someone else. Because to me, it's like, if I were to use it as an example, I would think about, okay, this child has, like, they have a friend, but they've been so lenient, so it makes sense to why it is what it is. But they're constantly, you know, they have not been able to lay down the law. So it makes sense to why they are in the position that they are. So this child needs to learn, or I need to guide them to start making their word have value, and then inherently add consequences, even if it's out of practice, because it is important, so that maybe the other party will finally understand and be like, oh wait, I do need to change. And that could be for the worst or the better, where maybe they don't want to change at all, or they choose to change.
It's a powerful approach to think of yourself or someone else as a child when it comes to understanding the importance of boundaries and self-respect. Just like you would take care of a child, it's crucial to prioritize taking care of oneself and setting healthy boundaries to protect one's well-being. By viewing the situation as if it were happening to a child, you can approach the situation with compassion and without harsh judgment, and instead focus on the goal of teaching and guiding towards growth and improvement.
Like sometimes, like let's say an example, like if someone gets cheated on, or maybe their partner is abusing them, or their friend is being really abusive or taking them for granted. If you were to learn that your daughter, that your son, that your child was getting bullied, that was getting physically attacked, or even in a relationship and they got cheated on, you would not stand for it, because that is not cool, that is not right, and your child should never be put through that situation. It's heartbreaking. And then you kind of think about, well, they shouldn't be in that situation. Let's get them out of that situation. How do we stop this, right? But then I also understand that when it comes to connections in general, it gets a bit messy, because then maybe if someone was cheated on, you understand that it doesn't look great for you, because it kind of showcases what you allow in your life. But then again, it's kind of like, who's to judge to a degree? But the other thing is, are you going to be okay with the rest of your life that knowing that this person cheated on you? Like, can you forgive that? Because then that becomes a bigger thing and a bigger formula, because then eventually you might end up resenting that person because you chose to stay and you chose for a reason, but in some way you can't live with it. So it's kind of like, you got to choose and understand yourself. Can you forgive this cheater or this abusive person to be in your life and be okay with what they've done? Can you move on? Because it's not going to promote a healthy connection or relationship. Or you just can't handle it right now, so you need to take a break. You need to take a step back. So it's a back and forth thing for sure.
You bring up some important points. When it comes to relationships, it can be difficult to navigate complex situations like cheating or abuse. It's important to prioritize one's own well-being and safety. If someone is experiencing abuse or has been cheated on, it's crucial to take steps to remove themselves from the situation and seek support. It's also important to have self-respect and recognize that it's not okay to stay in a situation where harmful behavior is being normalized. Being able to forgive and move on is a personal decision, and what works for one person may not work for another.
Because I've seen people stay in pretty toxic relationships, connections, friendships, right? but I also understand that sometimes they just accept the person for who they are. So it kind of comes down to a thing of like, are you willing to take on this person for all that they are, accept them and love them, but understand that if you're not going to enforce boundaries or whatever, that you have to be okay and say, you know what, I really love this person or want this person in my life, and I understand they do all these things that I might not agree with, but I have the inner peace and I'm okay with that. I'll accept that. So then that's a whole different level, because it's like you're choosing this and you understand what you're going through. You know what you're signing yourself up for. But then there's the other part of what happens if you don't agree with this, but you really, really want this relationship to work. Because then you're sacrificing something that you don't agree with. And that will steal a level of peace from you. And to me, it's more of, if you can't accept the situation, if you can't accept the person, even if like you're not happy with it, to a degree, then maybe the other option is to ask for a break, or take a moment, take a step back and focus on other things, focus on yourself, or maybe even end the connection, even if it's something that you don't want, and really figure out, what does this person add to you? What is it? Is it companionship? Is it a level of passion? Is it attention? What is it that it really draws you in and makes you linger? Both if it's a good situation or a bad situation. Like, what about them really makes you just stick it out?
Yes, staying in a toxic relationship or connection can be damaging to one's well-being and self-esteem. It's important to prioritize one's own happiness and safety. However, if someone chooses to stay in a relationship despite its flaws, it's essential to understand their reasons for doing so. Sometimes people may choose to stay in a relationship because of love, attachment, fear of being alone, or a desire to see the person change. However, it's crucial to recognize that staying in a toxic relationship without enforcing boundaries can lead to resentment and a decline in well-being over time.
And I will say that once you figure out a decision, be firm with it and take it on, own it, right? Because if you end up like leaving someone or walking away, do own it, do accept it. But also know that sometimes, like, once you heal yourself or you get in a better situation, then you can change your mind. But also understand that that level of, by you changing your mind, there's a big chance that things are not going to be the same as they were before, right? Because now the whole situation has changed. Everything has changed, right? So kind of like if you choose to leave a boyfriend or you leave a friend that you maybe deeply love, but they're not great for you, and you choose to walk away, make a decision, right? I believe in humanness, in the human condition, and human like experience. You can change your mind, understand that. So maybe in a few years, 5 years pass, and you guys reconnect, and things are not going to be as they used to be, sadly, but they could be different. And it's up to you and to be okay with the decisions you make, because decisions do matter and they do change anything regardless. And to me, like, going back to the original, like, of my issues with my friend, of constantly like acting defensive with me, I understand in talking it out right now that I have posed a lot of flexibility, lack of assertiveness, lack of consequences. So it makes it so that they believe they're acting right. They're acting right on the dot, and it makes sense.
It sounds like you have a deep understanding of the complexities of relationships and connections, as well as the importance of making decisions and then being firm with them. It's true that leaving a relationship or connection can be difficult, especially when there is deep love involved, but sometimes it's necessary for one's own well-being. And while it's possible to change one's mind in the future, it's important to recognize that the situation will have changed and things will be different. It takes courage to make these decisions and to stand by them, but sometimes it's necessary for growth and self-care.
Because the other thing is that once things are changed, because the thing is, like, if you're in a really bad situation or a really good situation and you change something, something's gonna change and it's not gonna be the same, and you have to be okay with that. That's just like the nature of life, like, overall. But the other thing is that understand that we change as people, as the connection grows. You might not be as consistent, you might not be as passionate, you might not be as interested. Like, things change. But going back to my situation, it comes down to the decision. Look at, as a recap, look at what the situation is. How did it get to that point? Take on your own accountability. See what contributed to this, and hopefully grow and pick at what could change if a similar situation were to happen. What boundaries could you do? What can you enforce? And alongside that, really just think about the decision and push forward with it. Because if you're going to change the relationship, if you're going to change the dynamic, you have to be okay with the outcome, because it's not going to be how it used to be. And you have to be okay with that. Because I know sometimes people stay in situations because they feel like that's the best they can do. And I don't blame you, and that's okay. Sometimes we do things out of survivalness. Maybe we do certain things because we need it on an emotional level, maybe a sense of dopamine, we need it, and I can't judge you for it. But sometimes time does tell.
It sounds like you have a lot of insight into the nature of relationships and connections, as well as the impact that our decisions can have on them. It's true that change is a constant in life, and that includes relationships and connections. As we grow and evolve as individuals, our relationships and connections may change and evolve as well. It's important to be mindful of this and to be open to change. At the same time, it's also important to be honest with ourselves about our own needs and boundaries, and to be willing to make difficult decisions if necessary.
Because to capitalize on time, the thing is, I've met countless people who have been in terrible situationships, relationships, connections, friendships, the whole shebang, family. And it's hard. It's really hard, because to them there's so much to lose, right? But when you don't have that confidence, when you don't have that outside view, you're gonna think, okay, this is all I have, and I need to hold it because it's all that I have. But beyond that, I have met so many people, and I tell them, I see that you're in a really toxic relationship, and I don't agree with it. I don't like that you're here. And I tell them the straight truth of, like, you should not be in this predicament. This is clearly terrible. But by the end of the day, they're not gonna leave, right? And I don't judge them for what they're doing, because time does change people, or sometimes it doesn't, but either way, we change regardless. We either change and get reinforced with a certain truth, or we change and change our truth, right? And so I
You bring up some important points about the difficulties of leaving toxic relationships. It can be very hard to leave a relationship, especially if someone feels like they have nowhere else to turn, or if the relationship has become a significant part of their life. It's important to approach these situations with empathy and understanding, rather than judgment. But at the same time, it's also important to be honest and offer clear advice, even if it's uncomfortable. Ultimately, it's up to the person in the relationship to decide if and when to leave, but they may find it helpful to hear an outside perspective. It's true that people can find themselves in difficult and unhealthy relationships or connections, and it can be hard for them to recognize or acknowledge that they're in a toxic situation. Sometimes people may stay in these situations because they feel like they have no other options, or because they're afraid to lose what they have. It can be difficult to watch someone you care about struggle in a toxic situation, but ultimately it's important to respect their autonomy and decision to stay or leave. People do change over time, and sometimes they may outgrow or change their views on a certain situation.
And with that, I would just say that with those people, with everybody in general, like, you guys are on your own journey. You are taking your time, and understand that maybe you know the answer. Maybe you need to do this, you need to leave. And that's okay. And you're just not ready. Just know that there's going to be a time where you're going to be ready. Or maybe your mindset, something happens and you're like, you know what? I need to leave. Or maybe you just choose to accept it and be like, you know what? I really love this person and I've been with them for so long. There might have been stuff that happened, but I want to choose to be here. I want I and that's completely okay too. You all are on this journey to become who you're meant to be, and life is going to take you wherever it's going to go. And so I don't really like judge hardcore. Like, I will give you what should be happening, what is right. I will try my best to guide you, but it's ultimately down to you as a person.
You bring up a really important point that at the end of the day, it's up to each individual to make their own decisions and choose their own path in life. While it can be tempting to judge or make assumptions about someone's situation, it's important to recognize that everyone is on their own unique journey and has the right to make their own choices. As you said, sometimes people need time to come to their own realization and make their own choices, and that's okay. It's important to respect their autonomy and provide support and guidance as needed.
Like, an example is, maybe I have a friend who's in a really toxic relationship, right? And I might be like, you should not be treated that way. But maybe that person, by them being there, gives them something that they need. And I like to think, am I going to give them that? Am I willing to put all that time and energy to give them that? They kind of know what they need, and they're getting it from wherever they need to get it from. So part of me is like, yeah, I could say, oh, my friend is just like this or whatever. They put themselves there. I could be judgy like that, but it's also kind of like, but they're just, they're being humans. They're getting what they need. They're doing what they gotta do, but then it's also like, if you're someone who constantly complains about the same thing of, I'm gonna leave him. If you have a friend that doesn't mind, like, I'm one of those friends where you could tell me the same issue over and over again, but maybe that's just because I know how life works. You're gonna leave when you want to, or you're gonna accept when you want to. So it's never like too much for me. But for others, they will tell you, be like, hey, be quiet. You keep talking about the same old thing. And it also just, it's just like so many different things.
Yes, it's true that people often stay in unhealthy relationships because they are getting something that they need from them, whether it's a sense of comfort, companionship, or emotional fulfillment. While it can be frustrating to witness a friend stay in a toxic situation, it's important to respect their autonomy and understand that they are making their own decisions for their own reasons. If they are constantly complaining about the same issue without taking action, it's okay to offer support and perspective, but ultimately the decision to change the situation is up to them.
And with that, I know that people do what they do. And in a way, they do it because they feel like they need to. They have their own reasons. So in a way, I can't judge them. But the only thing I could judge them for is how they treat me, or how they just interact with me. That's the only baseline I can really judge. If you have a lack of discipline, if you have a lack of control around me, I'm putting myself in harm's way ultimately, to a degree. And you're choosing to choose yourself in the situation. And to me, I'm not someone that likes to surround my people that are selfish in that way, or narrow-minded, because to me, I like to be as considerate as I can. And of course, if someone has issues with me and they let me know, I'm more than happy to reevaluate and reflect. So it comes down to what your morals are, what your standards are, what values you have, and if you have the means to change it or to go by it, And to me, with like just talking about this whole thing, there's a lot of reflection I need to do with my friend. And it's down to me to either make the decision of, what, I need a break, I need a moment, and really re-solidify my consequences, my boundaries. And maybe in the future, when I'm ready, we can try again. And if it ends up being they choose to violate those boundaries or choose not to reinvent themselves, it's up to me how I go about this relationship. I could either keep them from arm's length, but keep them as a friend, but maybe not as close, call it quits, or choose to accept them for all that they are and accept that this is going to be how it's going to be.